So did you see your dad talking about his string quartet?
Did I see you talking about? No, I saw a bit of it. There's a 3-minute, right?
Yeah.
No, I saw the first half. It looked great. It sounded great.
Well, have you played it?
Nope.
You haven't practiced it yet?
No, not at all. Of course. No, we're just going to sight read on Saturday, yeah.
So, what's your take on it?
I think it's great.
But aside from that.
Okay. Well, it's unique in that it uses... there's a certain intersection of styles, which I think this guy's probably already talked about. But what's interesting, and I hate to put it in the framework of new wine in old bottles or something, but it has a precedent in late Beethoven. I mean, you look at the longer kind of attacca quartets. I'm thinking specifically of Opus 131. And also the number of movements like Opus 130, and the varying lengths of the movements, and you start really fooling around with the different architectural considerations and also different styles. I mean, Beethoven was using everything from operatic material to marches to a col nidre, and all of this shows up, and it's sort of amazing. And we were just having this conversation the other day about especially towards the end of composers' careers. They kind of just throw they put the kitchen sink in, and just not to say that it becomes a pastiche or anything, but that there's a much freer use of style, of architecture, of pacing. And so what I think is attractive about this piece is that, it's like a half an hour piece, but it doesn't feel like it. And there's a lot of variety, and there's a lot of different style, and a lot of, as I'm sort of discovering as we play it, a lot of reference to other, not only one movement to the other, but also external musical references. So I think it's pretty cool.
You didn't describe the external influences.
I'm not sure I'm very conscious of it. I'm only conscious of the dance-like stuff that I had something Celtic in mind, and when I got to the last movement, I definitely had Al Jarreau and Miles Davis and my great jazz heroes in mind when I was writing it. And in the march movement, I really did have the Russian Stravinsky and Prokofiev in mind. And there's parts in it that are just me. There are these, I think, lyrical parts that in some ways are my favorite parts. That are, that seems to be me.
Well, and what I just said today after rehearsal, there's the section in the Arioso, the third movement, which to me smacks of Puccini. It's very, very operatic and very lyrical, and it's just like for a split second, it's like, ooh, late 19th century. Very cool.
And lots of my music I've written a lot of music for family, for my kids, and for kids to play. And I think that the Arioso trio in the second movement strikes me as that
sort of Suzuki Shinichi rag
kind of beauty, sweet and lyrical and gentle and fatherly.
So what was his influence on you musically?
Oh, well, I mean, everything, really. Growing up in his household, that was a certain spectrum, if you will, of music. So everything from Stravinsky, Prokofiev, Mahler to Al Jarreau, Miles Davis, James Brown. So not to say that there's a bifurcation or anything, but that all of that was part of the creative soup. As far as influence, I think I had a huge head start in school because we would do sort of rudimentary theory practice on the way to lessons. So, okay, tell me the note names in C major, or let's build some chords this way, or pull this note out of the air, that kind of stuff, which most people don't get until they're a freshman in college. So I was doing this for fun in the car. So that was I think it only became apparent later how much of a leg up I had, really.
Well, but we should also give credit to Mom, because I think you're a very verbal and literate person because of your exposure to theater, going to see Beckett when you were 8.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
And making your, Waiting for Godot was his and his brother's favorite piece of theater.
That's pretty dark, right? For like a 12-year-old to be like.
But we saw a very
Godot
comic performance of it at the Stratford Festival, and they were just laughing their heads off.
Did you feel pressure to get into music?
Well, that's a really loaded question. But
that's why I asked it.
No, yes and no. I think certainly there's always going to be, if you have someone as a parental figure who has a métier, that's always going to be first and foremost in your mind, right? So, if you're a civil engineer or something else, that would have been, something that as a child who grows up, okay, maybe I want to go to college, maybe I don't want to do this, that, the other thing, that's certainly going to be one of the options. So, but I don't want to say that in any way that my parents were, stage parents in the sort of media, sensationalized kind of way. Because I think, I've certainly met products of that environment, and they're not the most pleasant of individuals, or they are dealing with a lot of, emotional and psychological baggage. And I think I'm pretty well adjusted, so, I don't think I suffer from any of that. As far as pressure, if you're going to do anything really well, you have to be disciplined. And I think that was always something that was communicated, was that if you're going to do this, you gotta put the time in, and there is a certain amount of time, and you have to be structured about it. And I think that's important. I think that's certainly something that if and when I decide that I want to have children, I want to pass on to them for sure. Well,
and I think that Domenic was a bit the victim of his facility, so that when he started the fiddle, I'm not being immodest by saying this. He's just very coordinated and intelligent, and so this came really quickly, and so everybody around him, besides his parents, would say, you've got talent. And so, I think there was some push down deep, and you contradict me, but when he got to the time to go to college, my deepest desire, and I hope I didn't overstate the case to Domenic, was for him to go to my alma mater, Amherst, which would have been very different than going to conservatory. And he got into Amherst, and he got into Juilliard, and he got into the Cleveland Institute, and he made the choice he made. And in some ways it was maybe not the choice. If I were put in the position of making the choice for him, which of course I wasn't, I would have made. So I think that there was, I hope not the pressure, because it's a difficult life to be a professional classical musician.
It's funny, I was just having this conversation just the other day, and I think there's that, and we had a really nice college visit at Amherst, and it's a beautiful campus, and I think it would have been a very different experience for me. But my teacher at the time, Lee Snyder, had said, listen, people have told you could do a lot of different things, but I'm telling you, if you want to be a violinist, you have to do it now. And I think maybe of all of the things that people told me, that's still something that, when I think back on it, comes to mind, because he's right. You can't really realistically try to become a professional musician or a professional, I don't want to say anything, but certainly a professional artist of any stature, if you're going to start when you're even in your 20s. I think it becomes exponentially harder to do that.
Some people do it, but
some people do it, and all the power to them. And what's sort of wonderful is to see the stories of people who have chosen a job that isn't in the arts but are still doing the art at a very high level, and then somehow that becomes the focus. I have a lot of friends who are doing that now, and it's really gratifying to see that. And you don't have to just, I'm going to be a violinist or whatever. So
we were in Amherst at the same time.
No way.
I went to the University of Massachusetts.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah. Okay.
You got your PhD in '72, so we were there for 3 years at the same time.
Right.
How about that? That's cool.
Well, it's a beautiful part of the world.
Yeah, it is.
And intellectually fizzy, and just a lot of wonderful stuff going on.
Right. And
that was a particularly vibrant time, the early '70s.
There's a lot of music out there that is not well structured. Or is going after something different, like soundscapes or that sort of thing, which is great and wonderful. But I think that sort of discipline that even translated into, honing a craft, I think, is also part of constructing a work, and it has to be constructed. And maybe I'm putting myself, way back in the day, or exposing how conservative I am in terms of my taste or whatever. But I there's something magical about the Vega Quartet, where it's just 4-bar phrases, but it sure as hell doesn't sound like that. And so there's a certain magic in that. And I think that, not to compare my dad to Ravel necessarily, but there's definitely that level of construction, and it makes for really good timing, really good pacing. It always feels very natural, and thus it becomes very fun to play.
Would you have any advice for him?
Well, keep listening to me when I give him suggestions. Obviously.
And haven't I taken all of your suggestions?
Most.
Except for the pizzicato and the third movement.
Yeah, but that's okay.
No, and I had the quartet on my side, so I felt vindicated.
That's fine. I mean, but there's certainly a conversation, and I've learned, I think, compositionally, and I think he's learned idiomatically from an instrumental standpoint. Certainly from my upbringing. In the last 10 years, most of the chamber music I've written has either been, it's been mostly quartet with something else, with a singer, with a bass clarinet, with flute guitar. My exposure first to him as a fiddle player, and then to him as a chamber musician, just being in the room all the time when they're doing it, when they're talking about it, is really, it's taught me a lot. In fact, I think in some ways, I really trace my beginning of my true voice to two things. Dana Gioia, who's the poet who I've done so much setting of his text, and then to being Domenic and his brother's Suzuki parent, because I had to really come to grips with the physicality of a string instrument, because I never played a string instrument as a kid. I played keyboard instruments, percussion, brass instrument, and the core of classical music sound is the string instrument. And if you're not confident, you don't know what feels good and what's idiomatic, in some ways you can't write beautifully for the strings. And thanks to my experience with my children and with Domenic and writing lots of quartet music, I think now I think I've learned to be natural, but before the age of 40, I don't think I did it.
Wow.
Yeah, well, and perhaps also I think you've certainly written more now for the strings post 40. Almost exclusively.
Yeah.
But even the great vaunted masters
Brahms didn't know the violin very well.
Not very well, and I mean he was writing. All the correspondence with Joachim. I was just thinking specifically of Schubert, who was basically a pianist, right? And I'm not sure if he played anything else at a high level. Again, I'd have to do a little bit of research, but you look at how things are orchestrated, and even in Schumann, how one uses octaves, which is a very pianistic thing, and how that translates or doesn't to the strings, and Beethoven seems to do it right, and he played viola famously.
And Mozart does it right.
Some of these
Bach
guys,
does it right because he played viola.
well, he played violin too.
Right.
He was the concertmaster, so having the experience. But that was, that's what, you read these orchestration books. You read the one by Berlioz. You don't even have to read the thing. You read the introduction. He goes, talk to a player. Ask them how their instrument works. Play it a little bit. You'll figure it out. And that's Berlioz.
That's exactly what I tell my students.
It's like,
Well, that's it right there. So he's had a great, accompanying him and actually knowing the literature, especially the violin concerto literature, which they grew up on, that's very helpful in terms of learning to write the instrument.
But Schumann, one of the criticisms of his symphonies is that they're not very well.
Yeah, orchestrated piano pieces.
Yes.
They're thick.
Right. And George Zell, of course, has the famous, his versions of them.
Right. And there's some other versions of it also.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
Well, and you can tell the great orchestrators are often, certainly with Mahler, he was a great conductor, so he was always in front of that orchestra, and he just
the sound was in his ear.
The sound was in his ear, and you look at the score in Mahler, it's amazing, because you think that can't possibly be right. He's got the violins 2 P's and he's got the trumpets 2 F's. That's going to be unbalanced, and it's perfectly balanced because he knew exactly. And so when you go to conduct the Mahler score, just do what he said to do, because it'll turn out right. Yeah. So you have to. Yeah, that's another thing, is actually being a conductor has helped me become a better orchestral composer.
I think Dohnányi is one of the most underrated and least known in the States composer.
Exactly.
There's a sextet, which is excellent, and that's got clarinet and horn, I think, in it, and piano. There's at least 2 violin concertos. There's a sonata actually, which I played in a competition in Switzerland once, and that was great because I was the only one who played it. So, but it's a really great piece. It's a really nice. It's very chromatic and incredibly expressive. So,
Wonder why we don't hear more of him.
It's tough. People
to play it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's a whole other conversation about what is new music. We were told once by a festival that please, nothing contemporary. Nothing Ravel and afterwards.
Well,
so I mean,
what's unattractive about Ravel or Debussy? I mean, those quartets. I mean,
they're wonderful.
They're just fantastic.
But I was in Pittsburgh, as I mentioned to you, and I went to hear the Pacifica Quartet. And they played Ligeti first, and then a Mozart quintet with 2 violas.
With a G minor.
Yeah,
that's great.
But then they played the Ravel, and it kind of fell flat.
Really?
In part, it may have been the auditorium. All of the muted strings, it just kind of seemed like after the first 2 pieces, it seemed kind of like a letdown. And maybe it was the sound.
Maybe the difference in the sound between Mozart, you expect to get bigger as you go through a concert.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, anything that's coming to mind for me, well, 2 things. One was that we actually sent in our live recording of the last movement of Ravel to a grant writing sort of application, and the new music guy on the panel said, "Love your energy, it's great, it's fantastic." The other people said, "Oh, it's rough, it's terrible." So I think Ravel, like Bach, and like any of the sort of standards, people really start getting into camps, and they have what they want and what they, expect or whatever.
So you're suggesting that maybe the Ravel was played too politely, and that's why it fell flat?
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, also, the other thing that came to mind was what Peter Ungen said about playing the Ravel in particular. And they were doing, again, one of these community concerts in somewhere that they probably didn't want to.
Peter Ungen being the former
first violinist of the former Tokyo String Quartet. And they were, what's on the program today kind of thing. Oh, I guess we're playing Ravel again, right? And it was second half, same programming as Pacifica. And this old lady came up to him before the second half and said, "I'm so excited. I'm 89 or whatever, and I still have never heard the Ravel Quartet.
Really?
And I'm so excited to hear this work." And for him, that was like a moment, because, and I remember I think he was in front of the orchestra telling us this, and he said, you have to remember, it might be your 85th time playing it, but there's someone out there who hasn't heard it.
That's great.
So, I think that I try to remember that when the going gets the same or tough or whatever, But I grew up with those guys. I got to play in master classes with them, so they're kind of childhood heroes for me. And
Well, and you missed Mazumi and Sejong where I had him.
Well,
so
I got to play with him,
yes.
but he got to coach me in the master class, so that was cool. Actually, well, all those guys, Sebi Bernis and the whole crew. So.